So let me highlight some of these controversies. A few I've discussed already. But the separation of church and state issue has been highly contentious for at least the last half a century. Some are even arguing that we shouldn't have "In God We Trust" on our dollars because of that. But the counter arguments would be, well, primarily that making a vague reference to God is not the same as respecting an establishment of religion. And so far, the Supreme Court has not stricken that down. Regarding prayer in public schools, as I mentioned earlier, that actually has more to do with the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law, than it has to do with the First Amendment, at least according to the Supreme Court. So the claim that prayer in schools violates the First Amendment, well, the Supreme Court doesn't agree. Um, who has the right to keep and bear arms? That one has been highly debated. We already talked about that extensively. So the next one, taxes and general welfare. There are some who argue that Social Security, Medicare, etc., should be considered unconstitutional. Usually people defend those programs on the basis that they are general welfare, and so far the courts have widely agreed. The Patriot Act gave the federal government the power to tap wires and listen in on phone calls without a court order, and that was later considered to be a violation of the Fourth Amendment, that is, protection from unreasonable search and seizures. Recently, the National Defense Authorization Act was passed through Congress and signed by President Obama, and that gives the military the power to indefinitely detain terrorists without trial. The problem is, who decides who is a terrorist? Normally, the courts would decide that, but the NDAA does not require them to go to court. So basically, it takes away your right to a fair trial if it's enforced that way. One of the lower federal judges has already decided that that is unconstitutional. The question is, will it work its way up to the Supreme Court? But I can tell you that as it currently stands, that portion of the National Defense Authorization Act was ruled to be unconstitutional. There was an attempt by Congress to pass a bill called SOPA. That's the Stop Online Piracy Act. That would likely be unconstitutional as well because it gives the federal government through the Justice Department the power to immediately shut down any website that violates copyright without taking the owner of the website to court first. So it's kind of like you're guilty until proven innocent. They take down your website, and then you've got to take them to court and prove you're innocent rather than the other way around. Another contentious part regarding the right to privacy and abortion. The right to privacy is not clearly spelled out in our Constitution, but it's widely understood to stem from the Fourth Amendment, protection from unreasonable search and seizures, as well as the Ninth Amendment, that is, all basically those other powers, those other freedoms that are retained by the people, and the 14th Amendment, which does mention something about private property. And some would argue, and this is what this is with the opinion of the court in Roe v. Wade, they argued that abortion is of a fetus, and the fetus is a piece of property, they argued, and that the right to private property, as laid out in the 14th Amendment, protects abortion rights. On the issue of gay marriage or same-sex marriage, um, some would argue that equal protection under the law, the 14th Amendment, should guarantee same-sex couples the right to get married just like straight couples are allowed. Others argue that if one state allows same-sex marriage, as Massachusetts currently does, that the full faith and credit clause would expand that nationwide. That is, if two men or two women get married in Massachusetts, all other states have to give full faith and credit to that marriage. I already mentioned declaring war and making war. Congress declares war, but the president actually sends the troops in. And some would say the president should wait for Congress to declare war first. And then the word Congress, does that apply only to Congress or to state legislatures? Those are just some things for you to think about. But whenever you hear about Supreme Court cases that get pretty contentious, you'll often see these issues coming up. Well, I hope you have a good understanding now of the Constitution and are prepared to learn more about our government. Thank you.